Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Grasp on Robotics talk series. I am Pratik Chaudhary, and with Rene Vidal, who is sitting here, we are the faculty hosts for today's talk. As a quick reminder, previous videos can be found on the YouTube channel. And for asking questions, please raise your hand and wait for a couple seconds and for the microphone to reach you. We will try our best to notice the raised hand, but this helps the Zoom audience listen to your questions. Okay. With that, let me introduce today's speaker, Dr. Alan Yuille. Alan is a physicist by training. He did his PhD in theoretical physics at the University of Cambridge with Stephen Hawking. And then after postdocs also in theoretical physics, he flipped on a dime and he switched to AI. And he was a research scientist at the Artificial Intelligence Lab at MIT, which is the precursor of CSAIL today. And after which he was a assistant professor and associate professor at Harvard until 2002 and until 1995. And more recently, he was a professor of computer science at UCLA from 2002 to 2016. And I remember as a new graduate student, I was very excited to talk to him at UCLA. Right now, he's the Bloomberg Distinguished Professor of Computer Science and Cognitive Science at Johns Hopkins University. And he's one of the most fascinating researchers at the intersection of computer vision, neuroscience, cognitive science. His work has received an enormous number of awards over the years. Some of the big ones are a MAR Prize, which is one of the highest awards given to a computer vision paper. He was also runner-up for the MAR Prize again, Helmholtz Prize, and he's also a fellow of IEEE. Today, he will talk to us about vision language models and world models. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this talk. Sorry, I was trying to find myself, but okay, I'll let people time it. Anyway, give me a bit of sense of how I'm doing for time. So thanks very much for inviting me here. I could say it's, I haven't been here for a very long time, but I'm very happy that at least one person in the audience was here the last time I came. And I'm going to talk about 3D language models and interactive world models. And the abstract here, somewhat philosophical, but more than philosophical, is to say that much work in AI is purely data-driven with algorithms trained on enormous amounts of data sets, images, and text, leading to methods that are somewhat black box, have no real performance guarantees and aren't really terribly well understood. And motivated by cognitive science findings, that may be putting it a bit too strong. It's more sort of concepts coming out from cognitive science about how humans do intelligence. It argues that big data, big networks, however big, are not enough and need to be supplemented by interactive world models that have structure, knowledge about objects and agents in the 3D world, including physical, material, and fundamental properties. So we can, give some credit to cognitive science for keeping these concepts around, but I'm sure Regina will remember you might really call some of this good old-fashioned AI. Things that people were thinking around in the 1980s, etc. Motivates the research strategy, which will apply to vision language models. And in particular, I wanted to get algorithms that have knowledge about 3D, if possible, explicit knowledge about the world. So one thing I'm passionate about with my students is say the world is 3D. 2D images, don't believe in 2D images, right? They are they relate to the underlying 3D world. That's where, the aim of vision is to understand what's happening outside your eyes in the 3D world with physics and everything like that. So I'm going to talk mainly about the vision language stuff, then I'm going to add on extra material. Another old idea that's never really worked is analysis by synthesis. This was first advocated, I think, by Alf Grananda in 1963 with the idea that the process of synthesizing images, generating them, and analyzing them is really dual to each other and should be studied together. And I was convinced of this in the late 1980s, and I feel that vision will finally be solved when that link has been made correct. And these days, not just vision, but robotics and many other things. So let me start moving on, outline. I'll just say very little about the first project. This is just to say that I believe that when recognizing objects, you shouldn't just take a network that you train on some big data set that Feifei or somebody else has constructed. You can get algorithms that work on that data set, but they don't really have understanding of objects. Objects are three-dimensional. You want to, and algorithms, even if they're trained with huge amounts of data, are not necessarily going to have 3D in them unless it's hidden somewhere that you might be able to extract if you're clever enough. And instead, you should be directly doing object recognition by having three-dimensional models. And you shouldn't just be doing object recognition. You shouldn't sort of decompose vision tasks into task 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 1,000. If a human looks at an object, you recognize the object. If it's a face, you recognize the expression on the face. You also know the pose, etc. You do all that together at the same time. We don't in computer vision, or we don't historically, partially because we tried and it was far too difficult to do it, so we gave up. Or, so computer vision, you say, proceeded in times like the 80s and 90s by sort of becoming a rather boring strategy is, okay, we solved task 1 and we solved task 2, etc. Whereas in the 1980s, we were thinking bigger thoughts, but they didn't work. Okay, so here, and this is in ICCV in Hawaii, where a lot of my students are at the moment. This was an example of showing how to do that with about up to 200 objects. Why 200 objects? Well, because for this type of thing, you needed three-dimensional data to validate and for training the networks, and that was not really available. Stanford people had made data sets of objects which had about 15 or so with 3D. We made them with a lot more, and then we can train objects from them. Okay, well, that's just sort of to get started. The world is 3D. Now, talk about 3D vision questioning and answering and physical reasoning. So we want to apply 3D CompNets, which are essentially the methods I described just now, models that would estimate an object's 3D properties from images. And by the way, various things like robustness to worlds, to weather conditions and things. Anything with 3D in it's going to be more robust than anything which doesn't have it, because the 3D is going to be the same in, if you're recognizing a car and it's snowing, the 3D shape of the object is going to be the same, even if the appearance, even if the feature vectors are different. Okay, so now we're going to do two things here. One is that we started doing studies on controlled realistic synthetic data, and then in about 15 minutes, I'll talk about doing them on real-world images. So, and we're going to develop three-dimensional VLMs, meaning, well, you'll see what that means, which on synthetic will estimate 3D representations of images and answer questions based on the representations. And for this, you'll see these significantly outperform open source and proprietary VLMs, even from the people with billions or trillions of dollars or whatever it is these days. And for these cases, they also are interpretable. So this is a set of data sets we developed called Super Clever. Some of you may know the Clever data sets that were developed by a combination of Stanford and and Berkeley to some extent in the 1990s, and they were useful for studying visual questioning and answering tasks. Though in those days, big, mega LLMs and things were not available, so the sets of models one had were limited. And they showed rather nice, interesting insights. sort of the values of modular methods and the ability to do some generalization, and even a paper we did based on just, based off what they did, showing that actually the interior states of the system as they're answering the question can be checked, validated, and are actually correct. So it meant that you had algorithms which you knew what they were doing, you could work out what the failure modes were, you don't just evaluate them on what they do in the, at the end. So there's a whole series of these. As some people may know, it's not sometimes may not be easy to get these sorts of things into computer vision conferences, partly because these are synthetic images. Nevertheless, I think the findings on them were sufficiently interesting that I think we've never had a paper on this sort of things rejected. Okay, and with the 3D, it's nice. You've got control generation, you've got complete 3D ground truth, pose segmentation, visibility, etc. And you can study the failure modes of vision models and language. So this is just very simple. This is one of the early ones. So this one's not terribly realistic, but you can ask questions. What is the name of the brown part on the large rubber thing? So have to know what a large rubber thing is, another form of knowledge. 3D pose, what direction is the double bus facing? Left, is that facing in the image? You don't really want that. You want to know where it's facing in 3D, those types of questions. Occlusions, I love occlusions because occlusions are a way of showing what sort of algorithms don't work well and which ones do work. Okay, so that's just a starting point. So now here is one of the papers. This is CVPR 2020. So you have these setups with these objects in a ground plane, not a terribly realistic one, etc. And then you ask a series of questions that involve 3D knowledge about the world. And there are certain levels of the knowledge from level 1 up to level 5. And you require more 3D as you go down to the bottom. Okay, and you can talk about 3D relationships between different objects, etc. Okay, so you've got this. And then over here on the right, you see how well humans can answer these questions. That's this line down here. And you see that humans can do it about 90%. It may surprise you, why not 100%? Oh, I shouldn't pass this. Yeah, that's whatever, portal no man can pass, or no woman either, I suppose. Why don't people get 100%? Well, because in some of these images, some objects are heavily occluded. So that's where humans don't do it perfectly. Also, students are Hopkins undergraduates, which who knows what effect that might have. Anyway, so humans are at 90%. Now you take all these big VLMs coming from these huge companies, you do some fine-tuning of those on this data set, which gives you the images, answers to questions, and you see what their performance is on the right. They are, by the end, at level 5, they're 41% worse than humans. Right. Now, you can say, to be fair to them, they have been fine-tuned on this data set, but they don't have inside knowledge. They don't know which cars or objects are in there, but that doesn't stop a human. And on the other side, they've been trained with enormous amounts of data, with enormous amounts of computing power. Okay, so now we say, okay, what can we do if we use the strategy I mentioned, which is saying we treat this as a task of estimating the 3D structure of the scene, essentially doing a 3D parse. Detect the objects, find their 3D orientations, get a representation out like that, and then ask the question to the representation. And we want questions. Oh, here are illustrations of some of the questions involving spatial reasoning. Left to the red wagon, that's to the left of the red wagon in space, not to the left of the image, etc. Yeah, and things like, okay, will the red wagon collide with the yellow regular bus if it's moving forward? Okay, so what do? We take the images, objects, we apply vision models, estimate the representations using models that have three-dimensional knowledge of objects, but use neural features to activate these models. Okay, this would be called neurosymbolic if it was being done by people at MIT from Josh Tenenbaum's group. It's a very nice term. I wish we'd thought of it 10 years ago when we started doing it ourselves. No disrespect for Josh. I am a great admirer of Josh's work, etc. And so what you do with this, you can, in these cases, you get the correct 3D pass most of the time. The times you can't are also sometimes where objects are occluded, because then it becomes quite difficult. And here's what we get, a whole bunch of comparisons. And so the key line is at the bottom, humans 89 or something. The PQ3D VQA, which is our method, is the next level below, so it's getting close to humans. Then you've got all the other ones, the proprietary ones and non-proprietary ones, but Lava and Quen and so on. No, they're doing reasonably well, but they're not doing nearly as well as these methods. Sorry for the bad title here. The issue is one of the problems with publishing a series of papers which are essentially on the same data sets is to prevent the reviewers from deciding your work is novel or something. You have to come up with new terms for what you're doing each time, just so that they don't, it's not completely obvious it's you. So we've got a lot of names for these algorithms and different papers, but they're basically the same thing. Okay, so this is something you can do in this domain. Now, admittedly, this is a toyish domain, and computer vision AI researchers are rather questionable about toyish domain. So let's try doing another study on a toy domain. Let's do super clever with physics. And the point with physics is that you can now do this on a video, and you can use physics simulators to move cars and objects around in this scene. And then you can ask questions on the video, factual questions. Is the SUV moving faster than the yellow bus? Then what is the color of the bus which collides with the SUV? Will the red bus collide? You get the basic idea. Counterfactual questions. What happens if one object was standing still? If you stopped it dead, what would happen? And so, again, we didn't get human results on this time. Our method is called NS4D physics here, again, to confuse the reviewers. But basically, it's taking the same approach as in the static images, and using the concept of sort of Bayes common filters, where you have a model of how things move, which would be a physics model. Then you've got information from each image, and that updates your prediction. Good old classical cybernetics related types of work that happens here. And so here this works well as well. Sometimes counterfactuals, this Plava thing didn't do too badly. We're not quite sure why, but then these are big data set methods. So if they work, you don't really know why. And if they don't work, you don't really know why either. And a general point, I think, for my own research, but maybe for AI in general, is that in Europe, at least, there's concern about whether AI is controllable, because if it isn't controllable, who knows what's going to happen. And it seems to me one aspect of controllability is you have to understand the algorithms that you have. You have to test them properly. You have to know where their failure modes are. You have to interpret them. And if you can do that, then you can talk about controlling AI. And if you have a huge black box thing, well, I'm not sure what you can do. So this is endorsed by the European Parliament, I think, possibly not by the Parliament in the US at the moment, but who knows what may happen. Okay, so this is showing what you can do in synthetic images. And there you're saying, right, these methods with structured three-dimensional knowledge of the objects and knowledge about how objects can move and physics and so on are going to outperform the big data VLMs. Okay, so this is fine. We get these things published. We get them accepted. Yeah, go ahead.
This 3D understanding that has been tracked in time across frames and such, how do you decide the granularity of this representation? Should I track every object? Should I track?
In this case, we are tracking every object because in this data set, there are only about 15 objects, different types of objects. And in the scene, I'm not sure how many we've got in. We're tracking all of them.
The tracking is being done separately? Or
separately, yeah, for each object separately. There are more efficient ways of doing that. And also, you could, based on the question, you might know, hey, I don't care what the bus is doing. That's irrelevant. But yeah, that's the level of granularity we have. Renee?
Yes, I don't know if you can speak about the methods and how you actually incorporate 3D knowledge and got the improvements in performance.
No. No, I think there was so much to cover here. I've left a little bit of it out. But it was sort of, that was sort of in the first slide about the 3D models. You have, so let me say a little bit about that. So for a particular object category, you get a set of mesh models of it. Right? You align them roughly. It's a very crude alignment we do. I hate it, but it's worked so far. You put them in a cuboid box so that you can align them together. Then on each mesh, you learn a neural feature, which is supposed to be, supposed to be roughly invariant to viewpoint. There are other people who do work like this. Andrea Vidaudi at Oxford does some work that fits a bit like this. Yasenos Kikinas, one of my ex-postdocs, does things like that. There's a bit of a literature on that. I think we've been pushing it a lot more than other people have been doing in this case. But so, yeah, every object would have a mesh, a feature vector, neural feature vector learned for that mesh variable, and then you match that to the image, render and compare algorithms, meaning a very dumb algorithm. You take your objects, you render them around and propagate them into the image. You do steepest descent. And the trick for that is really getting good initializations and clever ways of doing proposals to say, this thing cannot be an airplane. It's got to be a car based on the features you can do. So I think with analysis by synthesis, and this gets back to work I used to do with Songcheng Zhu and Zheng Chu some time ago, you can have generative models to check the images, but you also need to have proposals to tell you, what generative models to use, right? And in the theory of analysis by synthesis from Alf Granano, it never really said how to do that. Find a hand in an image. He had an algorithm that took 24 hours to find a hand in the image because it didn't use any, it was just basically you simulate until you find what fits. But here there's such a huge space of objects out there, you've got to do something better. And proposal method was done. Actually, we got a MAR prize. Yeah, actually, that was the thing you got for the MAR prize some time ago, but not with sophisticated models like this. Okay, so anyway, so this is all sort of nice in its way. It's on synthetic images. Okay, so what can we do with real images? So then we move on to it's 3 other projects we did, and they're not quite as clean as the first set, but they work. And again, they show that if you get VLM models and you make them 3D aware, by meaning you let them know that the world is 3D and give you a bit of training data for that they will do better in some time. And for the second set, you could make it more explicit. So 3 things, one's at CVPR, one at ICCV just now, and the other one will be in NeurIPS. So here is, the sort of the core thing is you need a data set to test this. And I think interestingly, this was not the first paper published, the first paper accepted. So you get a lot of images. I think these were mainly coming from COCO or somewhere. You get people to annotate them with questions that seem to require three-dimensional knowledge of things. You know, which object is higher in the 3D world, the cyclist in orange suit or the yellow board? Well, actually, I guess the honest answer is you shouldn't really be sure about it. But generally, you'd say that the orange board was a very large thing, you know, in the background, and the bicyclist is not going to be higher than the orange board. It's a large building. You know, okay, maybe some really strange slant of the slope, but basically that. Orientation, okay, to the right-hand side of the object in 3D space or to the right-hand side of the object in the image. That's a wonderful question. Location, is the man with a suitcase next to or far away from the fire hydrant, right? Things of that sort. So we created this 3D DSAR bench that was in ICCV this year. Wufei Ma was the leader on it. Yeah, let me skip over this for reasons of time. And then to give these some knowledge about the world, we created, we wanted a data set where there was 3D ground truth. Now, there is not a lot of data in real images with 3D ground truth. There was this Stanford labeled, you know, the Stanford actually did 2 papers on this almost 10 years ago, I think. We created something called ImageNet 3D Plus by getting undergraduates to take models of cars and things like that, and then you match them into the image, and that gives you some sort of knowledge. Then there's Kitty, of course, was one, Omni 3D, etc. So there are some data sets, but not very many. Computer vision are really lazy when it comes to 3D because it's actually pretty painful to do it. So then we came up with another, well, not we, I have to say this is all my students, I'm just presenting it, which was to say, okay, now people talk a lot about foundation models these days and how wonderful they are, so let's use the foundation models to create 3D data. You can take SAM to segment things, you can take depth anything or something like that to give you the give you the shape. You can get pose anything or whatever it's called to give you the pose. And you got, was it tag anything, which will give you the label. So you've got 4 foundation models like that. Now, do you trust them? Well, not really. What you do is you apply them to a large set of images, and then again, you ask students and Hopkins undergraduates to say which ones they think are correct, and you throw out a lot which are not correct. Okay, but that gives you, that creates a data set with a lot of pseudo labels which you've got from the foundation models. And I guess the news here is that the foundation models are actually not bad some of the time, trained on the huge amounts of data they have, but you still have to throw stuff out. They haven't solved the problem for you, but they've done a lot. Okay, so that gives you 3D informed data was the term that we used for this. Some images with real 3D ground truth, and some with the, some pseudo-annotated by foundational models checked by humans. And then first paper, we developed a 3D VLM, which we call 3D aware, but not 3D explicit. 3D aware means what you do is you take a existing VLM. We took Lava because Facebook at that time was a good company. Well, Meta was. Well, things were open source. I guess they still have open source. This was a nice one. And then we just fine-tuned it. So you try and fine-tune it in 2 ways. You fine-tune it a bit to answer the tasks in the, in the test data set, 3D SR bench, but then also you fine-tune it to answer questions that you can get using the 3D informed data. So that gives it an extra amount of 3D knowledge that it wouldn't have otherwise. And if you do this, this outperforms the state-of-the-art VLMs for the spatial reasoning task by a lot. So here's a little bit about the 3D informed tuning, but you've got VLMs, they have clips and things like that, and so on. They have all those things. And really, essentially, you just put in a little box which you can train with these 3D informed data. And here is what you get out at the end compared to the other methods. So again, you're doing a lot better. You're doing up to, you're doing about 8 AP better than the other methods on this data set, on this real data set. And with the earlier case that I showed you on the synthetic data, you could argue, okay, our models have more knowledge about it. We know there are only cars and a certain number of things. Here, this is a very general data set. So you're getting up by 8 AP or something like that compared to the proprietary methods. And then the open source, the big open source methods. So again, I'd say this is real evidence that that having 3D knowledge is really helpful. And I have to say, particularly to younger people in the audience, these improvements are big, 10 AP or 8 AP. When deep networks started, and I'm sure some people here remember, the good old days, you get improvements of 8 AP or 10 AP on certain problems. Now people are struggling to get improvements of 1 AP or 2 AP. And sometimes you have to wonder if progress is being made at all, because also you think how many people are working on those problems now compared to the people who were working on them in 2011 or 2012. The community has grown enormously. The amount of computer power has grown enormously. The salaries of some of the researchers have grown enormously. But people are now satisfied with 1 AP, 2 AP. So for me, I like it when we see things like this. It reminds me of the good old days when you could really be sure that your algorithm was really contributing. Rene?
So I agree completely with the critique that 2D foundation models lack the ability to reason, to answer visual questions. But in particular, the way in which they do is not as humans would do it, which would involve detecting where the objects are, finding relationships, and so on. When you move to 3D, if I understood correctly, you took lava and fine-tuned it with additional depth into it.
Yeah.
But again, there isn't, that is sort of a weak extra 3D in the sense that there is still not reasoning about where the objects are.
Right. Yeah.
So the fact that you answer questions either in 2D or 3D is just by chance or by...
No, I would turn it the other way around. It shows that just giving these models a bit of extra knowledge about the world, such that objects are 3D, you can get incredible improvements in performance. I don't want to stop there at all, but I'm just saying, just put a certain amount of 3D knowledge into them explicitly in training makes a huge difference. Now, I guess people will say that the VLMs and large language models, they have a lot of knowledge about 3D. They certainly have some implicit knowledge about it, which people can extract now in very clever ways. They've seen a lot of things about the world, and arguably to answer some questions, they may need some implicit knowledge about the world, and maybe that's inside the network and it will emerge at some time. And I've argued this with Stefano Suato, who some of you may know or even studied under, and he's tending to believe that may happen. I can't say that it won't, but I'm saying, hey, it's a lot easier just to put it in anyway. I mean, the way, I am motivated by at least, by how humans do it, and I say I probably motivated more because I'm a human with a vision system who thinks about these things and because of the actual literature. But I think that's, that sort of world knowledge we have for humans, and become a father late in life, so I have a 5-year-old son, so I can examine him. You learn about the world by interacting with it. You play it, you touch it, you pick things up, you drop things, You've got sort of embodied AI is one term for that, but it's really like humans maybe sort of building world models about the world to make predictions and so on, which gets back to, classic cog-sci work by Alison Gopnik at Berkeley talked about this for infants. I think that's what you really need in AI, or at least that's what I like to do in AI compared to the sort of just big data, big computer approach. Okay, so now let me move on a little. So that was a spatial reasoner. Oh, I forget the names. Again, we have to change the names each time. So now try and make it more 3D explicit and 3D aware. And so this means you go into LLMs or VLMs with this sort of chain of thought reasoning process that they have, which is beyond the standard LLMs don't have that. You train things in a supervised manner, unsupervised manner, then you do some supervision on it, etc. But with chain of thought, you then have a series of stages that you can do, which for someone like me is nice because I think of it as compositional. Okay. So spatial reasoners, you want to say you've got reasoning trajectories. Again, for time, I think I may skip through this, but it's sort of going on to, chain of thought. This is sometimes called on-demand learning or on-demand reasoning, or computational time reasoning. You do more work when you're actually reasoning than you've done by learning, but you've actually learned a lot of the structure of the algorithm. And maybe to illustrate what this is, let's look at the qualitative comparison of what we did with state-of-the-art. So we took a big open source thing called Quen and ask it this question. The question is about, for this man in the falafel side, is the bottle of water to his right or to the left? And it's going to depend on whether you do it in the image or whether you do it compared to his 3D pose. And the one we started with says that the bottle of water is on his left side because it is, in the image. Then you look at ChatGPT and Gemini. So both of those get it wrong, but they do give explanations about how they make the decision. And those explanations, and these are chain of thought models, show that they've got some understanding of how they should answer this question. They should break this question down into where is the human, what is the human 3D pose, where is the bottle of water, those types of things. So that they've got some knowledge, awareness of. ChatGPT sort of gives an explanation, but so it's got a bit of chain of thought there, but it gets the vision part wrong. Why? It doesn't know about 3D, is our interpretation. Then you go down to Gemini, and Gemini is more explicit about the process that it does, locate the man in the image, locate the bottle of water. Everything is right. The process is completely right. The answers are wrong. At a certain stage, some level, they start making mistakes because they answer one of the visual questions wrongly. And our method, which takes this model, fine-tunes it by putting more the 3D, using the data again from the 3D, 3D benchmark data set, works quite well. And so this is nice, I think, nicer than the earlier model because it means you're starting to get some interpretability. If you don't answer the question, and the question relating to 3D is broken down to these sub-pieces, and these sub-pieces are implemented, then you can see where do they fail? Where do they make mistakes? So with chain of thought, I'm forgetting how many how many links there are in this chain, maybe 5, 10 or something like that, but you can just check, okay, is link 1 working? No, is link 2 working, etc., or not? Okay, so, and here is the comparisons with all these things, and the idea, again, is that we do better than the others by quite a reasonable margin. We could do better still. Actually, there are technical reasons why we don't, and if you get into the details of the things, the chain of thought is based on tokens. These tokens are designed for text because it's natural to take a word and put it into tokens. It's a very easy one. You try and do it in vision. You're adapting something developed for vision enveloped for language into vision, and the tokens aren't really the ones that you would have chosen yourself. You have to work with them. So there's ways here, technical ways, I think, of improving things quite a lot. Okay, so that's a summary. Again, that for the 3D VLMs, you can do that if you put 3D knowledge into VLMs, either explicitly or implicitly. You put them in implicitly, and if you have chain of thought, then you can start showing explicitly how they're using it and where they will start breaking down. Okay, so how am I doing for time? Okay, that's good, because this was going to originally be my main talk, because, but then I decided, okay, no, we're not going to stop here. We ought to move on, and there are a couple of other things I want to say. So one thing is, okay, how do we scale this up? Right. And we have stuff where with a lot of extra data sets, which we are creating synthetic data sets, which can be done for this. These would also tie in, and I guess I say this when I'm trying to get funding money, which is not easy these days, that this would tie in for static images. The same things apply to reasoning and robotics as well. This would work for anything of that sort. Okay, so now moving on to a related approach, which hasn't completely been linked with it, but all the work I've done now is saying that we have a three-dimensional, somebody's created lots of 3D objects which are annotated and data sets, and we've got a lot of people to annotate them, etc. So that's nice. But now let's think about seeing if we could learn the models directly from images. Okay, so this was a project called GenX, and I think I won't show you. If people want to see the 2-minute thing of it, I may show it later if there's time or interest. So now of course, that LLMs are based on sort of generative models. You predict the next word based on a whole history of previous words, and the transformer architectures are very nice because you use a transformer architecture to do it, because it means that it knows, it can use context from a long way away if it's necessary, or short, it's very adaptive. So you can do these things for images, and you can take images that you can get from some source. So one source here was just you go to Unreal Engine 5, and you have videos, and then you can train autoregressive models on these. And I can't help remembering when I used to start working in this area, autoregressive models were nice, but they were a bit boring because they were always Gaussian distributions, because that's the only thing people would actually ever work with. And some people may remember those days, so I thought, okay, nice idea, no good, no use. But the autoregressive things are incredibly effective if you start having the transformers, and that's one of the reasons behind the LLMs. So do these on images, put in an image, predict the next image, but also don't just do that. Predict the next image conditioned on your movement. So there was a static world assumed here, then you can move in the world one step forward, predict what the image is going to look like from that. And then you can predict the sequence, and you can have a very nice, create a very nice sort of video of object, moving within the scene, and you can even set up a sort of a GUI thing so you can see this image, and then you can navigate through this old German city or whatever it is virtually by doing it. Right. So this has nice other properties. This, starts meaning you can, in a way, you can think of imagining the future from a particular image, what's going to happen to me in this domain if I start walking around like that. And you can then do things like reasoning. You can throw in all these reasoning things from LLMs, and you can do sort of imaginative robotics of what you would do if you take actions using this. Okay, so the agents can explore environments, build up world models from data. So building up world models for data is sort of perhaps the key thing I want to mention here. At the moment, you're not relying on somebody having made a lot of three-dimensional assets to render images from, as we were doing earlier. You were saying with these systems, you can actually move around and, and perhaps learn the models from real data. Now, the models here you're learning are only two-dimensional, or you're learning actually panoramic images, so you know what it's going to look like in this direction, etc. And then you can, in work that's sort of a moment under review, you then start lifting these models up to 3 dimensions. Because you've got a nice video of things happening, you can use algorithms like VGGT from, there's a fashionable way of doing multi-view things from Oxford, or other types of methods to get a 3-dimensional representation of the scene. Admittedly, you evaluate this in a slightly boring way at the moment. You evaluate it by saying this gives you a more consistent world if there's a 3D world underneath it. But the more exciting thing is this would give you a way of creating 3D worlds for yourself. You get similar videos like this, Feifei's company, whatever, they put up something and then we put up something to say, oh, ours is nicer, or something like that. Joking, of course. But just to say, you can get really nice videos. DeepMind does it too. And again, we're sort of playful competition with them. They have all the sources. I've only got a few graduate students, but they are highly motivated and talented. So you construct the interactive world models for data. This will allow, and if you put the 3D in as we're doing, this will allow you to get 3D reasoning and planning. At the moment, we don't have the 3D data in them, so we can do reasoning and planning, but it's more like the reasoning and planning that standard VLMs were doing that I criticized earlier. But still, the concept of the world model is good. Here is the interactive world model by image generation. You start out with a single image. You do something to turn it into a panoramic image, meaning you know what's going on behind your back where you can't see it. And then you build this world that the agent can start exploring in it. And then you can move from just being a limited vision scientist. We've sort of moved from the last few years of just being vision scientists to being vision language scientists. And now we move from vision language and reasoning scientists, and soon we'll be vision language reasoning robotics scientists as well. Okay, so that's something which you do for that. Imaginative exploration, what's in front of me? Okay, this car stopped ahead. Why is that happening? Is that because the driver is bad? Is this traffic light gone red? Or if you hear a siren, maybe it stopped because there's an ambulance or something coming by. So the world model concept, I think, is taking, I started out from just 3D objects and moving to say when you do vision and language, you want to have 3D objects and 3D knowledge about the world. And then these world models give you ways to get some understanding of the real world, 3D models of it. And you could have agents and play around with this and have multiple agents who play with each other and stuff like that. Okay. So a little bit longer. Okay, so that one is to create worlds. And as I said at the beginning, I think, inspired by Alf Grenander and David Mumford, who picked on it soon after that and made it particularly appealing, that the process of analysis by synthesis should be dual to each other, or you should think of it like that. You don't want to just have an algorithm that can recognize an object, and do all these other things with it. You also would like to have from an object, you'd like to have a model that can generate images of it too. Then you've really understood it in some level. Okay. So synthesis means that you can synthesize realistic images, and then and these two things are related together. Autoencoders are a sort of nice concept for that's been developed by a few people. I mean, classical autoencoders were basically doing rather boring things like PCA, using deep networks to do PCA, essentially. But now you take the picture from that, and this comes out as a number of things in my group do from some of the ideas that Josh Tenenbaum did at MIT Cog Science. So you have the image, you have a 3D representation of it, and then you generate the images again. So if you have a three-dimensional, well, I shouldn't say that because that's not what they did, but you have an image, you have a nice representation of it. The encoder takes the image, turns it into the representation, and then the representation, from that you generate the image. So you need an encoder, decoder in neural network terms, or an analysis and a synthesis in Alf Grinalda's terminology. And if you do that, then you can, in principle, train models just by saying, okay, do they output what you input? That means you've encoded them well and you can reconstruct them. If you try to do that for anything like the things I've been describing at the moment, it doesn't really work at all. But what I'll show you now in one slide is what you can do for some of that if you assume that you've got a good generative model, a good decoder. And so this is work, actually to appear in NeurIPS, where you essentially do that. You assume, in this case, you just do representation of the image is just a text description. And then from the text description, you can generate an image by using a diffusion model prompted by text. And you don't learn that, you just take one that somebody's done. And then you train an autoencoder to take an image and to estimate the text. So essentially, you're learning a vision language model from images to language without any supervision at all, just with the fact that somebody has gone to the trouble to make a nice vision language generative model. So there are all sorts of advantages of this. It needs less time, it needs less work, etc. And this is, I guess it doesn't show very well on this, but this shows you can get very good text captions in this method as evaluated by standard methods. There was an original paper we did with Google, which sort of had certain, got published, had certain technical difficulties. Frankly, it could only be run at Google. But working with my ex-student Chen, we then updated it, modified it, made it nicer, and meant we could run it at Hopkins. So this again, for me, is not fully satisfactory. This does not have 3D in it. It should, hopefully it will in a bit. But it's illustrating the idea of saying if you have a very good way of doing synthesis, then you can almost immediately turn it into a way of doing analysis. And I guess vice versa. Okay, so one more topic here. So changing the theme completely, but to the medical imaging, a topic that Regina worked on some time back, and a very important topic, is that we do work on early detection of cancer from CT scans. This is one project. It's, we started doing it at Hopkins because they had some data for it, etc. And nowadays, and this is a collaboration with people at UCFC, University of California at San Francisco, Kang Wang and Yang. What you can do is you don't just get CT scans, you can get CT scans plus radiology reports for the scan. When radiologists look at a CT scan, they don't just look to see if there's a tumor in it or anything like that to do diagnosis. Well, they can't do diagnosis. They can only suggest something that can lead to people doing further tests. But then they write down a very nice detailed description of the CT scan. It's doesn't tell you exactly where the tumor is, if there is one, but it tells you roughly where it is. Now, why that's important? It's important because otherwise, people who are trying to find tumors in CT scans would rely on somebody going in and annotating tumors. And then you could train deep networks to do semantic segmentation to detect the tumors, and we and other people did that, and those methods work very well. But getting these annotations are really painful to do. You have to train people who have medical knowledge, residents in medical places to do this. It takes time. And it's not easy at all. Finding the tumors, visualizing them is a really difficult thing to do. And also, you don't want to detect just tumors. You want to detect the early ones, because the early ones, if you don't detect them, that's where your life expectancy can be measured in terms of months for certain types of cancer. Okay. And so there were two tasks I'm going to mention here. There's a lot of other work on this area. One task is to say, okay, can we sort of use these reports to, to train algorithms without needing, well, I'd like to say without needing any per voxel mask annotations. So we use a few to get started, but nowhere near the amounts that you'd use otherwise. Can we do that? So that's one task that you can think of as being vision language. And people were addressing that by saying, okay, here are CT scans, radiology reports, take a big vision language model to generate the report. That was what people were doing, or one method. We're saying here, no, we've got more details, so let's treat this more like a semantic segmentation problem where we have labels, but the labels have noise, there is noise in them, or really there is a missing variable. So for me, this is like a classic, you treat it more as a missing variable problem, where it says there is a tumor, roughly what size it is, but they don't specify the position. So that's a different way. It's more consistent with what I said earlier. You're putting in representations here. You're not just relying on some big brute force model. Okay, and so basically these things work. Here's background. Pancreatic cancer survival rate increases from 7 to 10% if detected at early stage. I had a friend from school who got pancreatic cancer, hadn't seen him for many years, was thinking of seeing him when next time I went to England, and then found he died in a month. He got pancreatic cancer, and that was it. So very deadly unless you catch it early. There's a huge number of people who are scanned taken every year in the United States, 80 million for a variety of reasons, not for looking for cancers at all, but those are scans which you could run you could run algorithms on. Now, radiologists can find these things, but they're not easy to find. Humans are not adapted to looking at CT scans to find these things. Also, humans can only see the world in 2D. AI algorithms can get the data out from these scans, which are three-dimensional. So the AI has a big advantage, provided it's got training data. Okay, so here are things, ducts, pancreas, etc. Estimate the representation from the image, treat it as a sort of more like a semantic segmentation problem with missing data than just as something to throw VLM at. And we do it in 8 organs without annotations, or possibly that's not right. Possibly we have 100 annotations or something to start with. And then here are the results you get out on 7 tumors, for which I think, as far as you know, there's no publicly available per voxel mask annotation data for the tumors at all. And yet you're getting pretty reasonably good quality results. And in the black, you've got the radiologists, admittedly not evaluated on the same data, but the reports of how they perform for these tasks. And you're doing pretty much better than those for most of these things. This is not a criticism of the radiologists. It's just this is a really difficult task to do, and it's one area that AI has advantage, provided it's got data and annotation. And as you may know, 10 years ago, Jeff Hinton insulted radiologists by saying they ought to be looking for new jobs. And I don't mean that at all here. This is far more that this would enable them to do their things a lot better. This is not the end of this. This is just the first thing we've got with this, and there's all sorts of ways to scale it up and get it to go better. Then you could do report generation. So this is to help them because they look at a scan, they have to write a report. That takes time for them. And if the algorithm can just sort of give you that report immediately and they can check it and validate it, then that means they've got, they can study the thing more closely. It takes away a lot of the sort of grunt work that they would otherwise have to do. Otherwise, they'd have to report this into, Siri or Lexis, whatever thing was, and it would be better. Okay, so this is, I've covered a lot of material. I think I'm just about on time. World models, oh yeah, sorry, I put in this slide, I can't resist it. Okay, just to say, yes, you can do world models on this too. Being presented this week, ICCV. So this would mean that you try for the medical thing, you don't want to just take it as a static thing, you'd like to predict what your CT scan measurement would be in the future, particularly if there's some sort of intervention, some sort of treatment. It's almost like having a physical model, and then you may also want to predict backwards to see what it could have come from. So this is a starting point. I think it's the first paper on that that's around. Okay, so then getting up to the conclusion. So I guess the constant theme of this work is really inspiration from about cognitive science, or I can't help saying also some amount of good old-fashioned AI concepts, as distinct from some of the purely data-driven methods. I mean, I'm not against data at all. Data is incredibly important. I'm not against big data methods. I'm just saying that I think with more thought, in some cases, you can arguably do better. And if you think from the human perspective, why humans are, why we're sitting around in universities rather than just sort of hiding in caves from saber-toothed tigers is partially because we have learned about the world. We build world models. We start when we're children. And that type of learning is so different from the way big data models are trained. Having got a young son, I'm not advocating that we should train the systems the way young children get trained, because I guess as any parent knows, that takes quite a lot of time. But I think we should take inspiration from that and sort of see how to give the models the sort of knowledge that it might take my child a year to learn, or, etc. That would be so I think that's there, then the idea of the world is 3D. Out there, it's three-dimensional. There's physics and things going on outside in the world. We're just observing patches of light rays. And similarly in medical, we've got a physical body, organs are changing, things are happening. We're eating healthy food or unhealthy food. That's causing tumors may start growing spontaneously, right? But that's sort of, we should be modeling that sort of physical world and then treating the images as a way to get insight into what's going on as a measurement process. Relates to analysis by synthesis, etc. So I think those are the main points. And I guess at the end, I'm saying for me, vision is sort of perhaps moving. At first it was vision, then it became vision language because of all the successes of the LLMs. So I've been a little bit critical of them, but I mean, as somebody said, it's really good to have bad enemies, good enemies, but, and they're very good in their way and wonderful methods there. Then I think move on from this to reasoning, to actions, to robotics, to a lot of other things. So, okay, with that, I'll stop now.
Thank you so much. Questions?
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. If you don't mind, I wanted to push back on the main hypothesis of your talk.
Go ahead.
I think that the findings in cognitive science that humans recover 3D task-independent information are not very strong. They are at the very least debated, right? The world model that you're talking about, I totally agree with. Is that world model 3D metric as the one that you showed, that I'm less sure. And beyond that, I would argue that in computer vision and in other fields like robotics, as soon as we got rid of this prison of 3D, we were able to get a lot of very good results. Look at the video models that we have today. So yeah, it is provocative, right? Just because
Well, no,
it's more
I'm
fun,
happy with that. I have,
more fun to have it
I
this way.
have a,
But I'm not sure that this is the way to make LLM or VLM better.
okay. So I agree with the first part of your talk. I feel like we're taking inspiration from what humans do, but we're not limited to what humans do. I mean, there's the idea that humans, Tenenbaum will sometimes say, oh, you've got a computer vision simulator in your head. Well, if we do, it's not a very good one. People can imagine things with 3D knowledge. My father was an architect, so I think people who do architecture actually probably have incredibly good 3D recognition, but people don't usually have it. I'm saying, though, I think it's a good thing to do. I don't think we should mimic what the brain does, because the brain is limited in terms of resources. It's also limited in terms of history and things like that. It can't do it. But I'm saying AI can. That would be the argument for it. So that would be, I agree with you on the first part by saying, yeah. And yeah, I can submit my cognitive science knowledge stuff is, speaking as a professor of cognitive science, is somewhat cherry picking the bits of cognitive science that agree with my prejudices, which I think come from more thinking about, I'm a human, I want to interact with the world, and taking inspiration for that. Second one is, yeah, you can make nice videos. I think you'll make them better if they're 3D, if 3D is put in that. That can be debatable. We have papers about that as well. So I'm not sure that convinces it. I mean, what I would agree was that sort of following too closely to what CogSci or the study of vision tells you when developing algorithms may not be a very good strategy with hindsight. And I can say from, when I started, it was sort of almost thought that those two things came together. And I think, yeah, they diverge. But I think taking the cognitive sciences inspiration and thinking what you could do if you were not, stuck with, in various aspects of biology that are not good. Again, as a recent father, I would say, biology is incredibly good sometimes, incredibly stupid some other times. So you want to take inspiration for the good and see how we can make it better. But then I would say with the videos, you can do those things. It's impressive you can do them. I think you could do them even better with 3D, but also that's synthesis only. I don't want to just do synthesis. I want to do analysis as a vision professor. And if they are from 3D, then I can use them to do analysis, etc. So I half agree and half don't. But I like yeah. Please go ahead. Anyone else ask provocative questions? Or non-provocative?
Thank you very much for this comprehensive, really, tour de force. Congratulations. However, you are a physicist from the long time ago.
Yes.
I remember, right? And what surprises me that, and maybe this is sort of just the fact that one has only a limited time, that focused only on vision, when the world is much more than just visually represented, especially when you talk about dynamics. You have to feel it, the physical forces. So when I look, I completely agree with your conclusions, but I think your system would be much broader if you would talk about behaviors, actions, which of course includes 3D, no question about it, but it also has to include whether an object is pushable, whether an object is pickable, whether is bendable, whether all those beautiful physical properties that we in the robotics community had to spend our lifetime. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thanks. No, thanks, Regina. And also, I mean, credit to my students, not to me. I'm the front man. They've told me what to say, etc. So it's really all due to them. But I think there are points you'd make there. I think, what would I say is finally, I guess recently we are seeing the light. We will be doing those things here. Yeah, and we're starting to do them. I would say then two reasons for me why I stuck on vision for a long time is that really, and not robotics, one was I was just amazed when I thought how much we got from the world just from light. It's amazing. It's magical. It's a miracle that we can perceive the world the way we do from patterns of light. And that realization maybe was one reason I stopped doing physics. The other part, the area of physics I was doing, quantum gravity, I thought was a dead end, and it seems to have been a dead end too later. But right, that was sort of the miracle vision. The second one is why didn't I do vision or robotics? And this was sort of like a matter of taste. And I felt that to do the robotics at that time, you had to restrict yourself to some degree to vision algorithms that could work fast enough to be useful. And I felt that wasn't really me. And I would go even further in saying, although I've worked a bit on motion things, I really wanted to see how much you could get out from a single image, because then you could get more out of sequences of it, but think of it from that perspective. So I've known some students, not yours I should add at all, but who were trained to do something, but because it was required to work quickly, just didn't really work. So on robotics, I was very impressed with the Ernst Dickmann's work in Germany, because it seemed to me from the outside, he took his time, went systematically, but
Want to share? It by the television. I wake up and I see certain situations from my childhood, from the Second World War, when the Nazis would come, and I feel shaky.
yeah.
So it is not just the vision, but it's also the physical reaction.
Reaction to it, yeah, no, I certainly would agree with that, not from personal, but from the findings I know from cognitive science. And I've seen climbers who had a terrible accident, incredible things survived. He went back there years later and he had, he was terrible physical situation. He was a very tough man and he just fell to pieces because the vision thing just reminded him so much of the real experience where he nearly died. This was in the Andes. But yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. It's just for myself on the strategic side, I thought, okay, let's see how I really want to concentrate on vision and how much I can get out from it. Now that that's beginning to work, I then see how I and my people, group people, could move on to doing things with, with motion and things like that. I'm just remembering, you may have a different take on me, but it seems in the 90s was the area of tracking objects. So a lot of this was done or driven by my good friend Andrew Blake. And to tease Andrew, I would say, well, if we could actually detect objects, tracking would be less important. So in a way, you could argue as a teasing thing to a good friend, okay, well, hey, you invent this subject so we can publish papers on it. It's unfair because at that time, detecting objects were really difficult, and you could show you could do pretty interesting things in vision by tracking, but that gave you the advantage. You were able to initialize it. So I felt that there I was feeling, the way to do tracking is partially let's recognize objects every frame, use the tracking thing to make it faster, etc., and so on. So, but anyway, that's a decision. I mean, it's a decision choice of what to do. And I think maybe vision now has got to the stage where, particularly if it embraces 3D, then it can get into that. And we will be, moving into that area, I think. Thanks.
Any other questions before we end?
Thanks for the great talk. I have two brief questions. So first is for the spatial reasoning, so it still heavily relies on LLMs. Do you see the possibility of doing the spatial reasoning in 3D understanding without the relying on the huge capability of LLMs? Because something is like the 3D intuitive can happen without language. Second question is, given that vision and LLM is evolving so fast, like almost any new idea seems like approachable within like 2 or 3 years. What do you see as like a huge gap, like probably won't be solved in the next 5 years? Like you may need even longer time, like a decade to solve. Thanks.
Okay, okay, let me see the answer to the first one. Well, the first project we did not rely on LLMs at all, except as a tool to create things. The second one did. And so I've certainly been thinking very much about, okay, can we get rid of the VLMs if we want to do certain types of, what sort of questions would the LLMs actually help for? A lot of the VLMs, particularly if you're talking about vision and then vision robotics and planning, VLMs are perhaps developed, for reading and, for conversation, things like that. That's not what we really need to do for images, I think. Humans survived for thousands, well, millions of years or however long it was without speaking. And I've been in countries for weeks where I had to communicate by sign language. It's fine. You can't have a really interesting talk, but you can get by, you can manipulate, you can perform functions. So I've certainly been wondering about how far one can go before one needs a high level, before one needs all that enormous data. And for myself, starting off with the vision, I would move up a bit, and we are moving up a bit in the objects, including whether objects are squishy or not, relating to Regina's question, and seeing how far we can go with that, etc. The second one is 5 years. I think I'd have to say that depends on grant funding. Yeah. I guess the professors can particularly see the point of that. No, I guess in computer vision, people would often say, okay, we're going to solve everything in 5 years. Patrick Winston at MIT, who was sort of like probably not well known outside MIT, but he was really one reason why MIT was so good in AI was Patrick Winston being there behind the scenes to do things. He would always say, we'll predict it in 20 years, and one day our prediction will come true. So for myself, I'm more saying I think a lot of things could really be done nicely, but I'd say you need to do things, well, I'm pushing my agenda, of course. I'm saying, okay, if you do it in this type of way, I think you have to combine not only the big data methods, but you have to combine the structured representations inspired by cognitive science, I should say, not copied by that, and related to the good old-fashioned ideas that were around even in the late 70s, etc. And I think if you need to do that, then you could develop AI that's responsible and testable, etc. Will it be 5 years? It's conceivable if people have the right grants, but then, as we know, well, I know, right, for roadblocks, you think something's going to happen in 5 years and it doesn't. But I would say for this is that you really need to get the AI to be, responsible is a term that's appreciated in both sides of the Atlantic, interpretable, prediction-free, etc., failure modes known, failure modes understood, and hence controllable. That needs to be done. And this work is a attempt to step in that direction.
So on that note, thank you, Alan, again.
Okay, thank you.
Next Friday, we'll have a talk by Chris Hauser from your UC. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Not a lot math here. Oh, hi, Russell. Hey, Russ. Good to see you.
Like 20 minutes later in the afternoon to chat.
We have some time to catch up. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Good. Yeah.
I only found out yesterday at 5 o'clock.
Oh, I see. Yes, I saw you weren't on the schedule yesterday, and I thought, oh, well, maybe Russell doesn't want to see me. No.
Yeah.
That's good. Oh, very good to see you again, Regina.
functionality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right. The certain of the shape, that gets back to things that Mike Grady did at one time. Oh, that was function. That wasn't knives, but I mean, right, it's sort of the form and the function type things. Yeah. Well, we're beginning to get there finally. We vision scientists. Yeah.
One question is the analysis by synthesis. I'm sure you've gotten this many times. Analysis, synthesis being duals, they don't say anything about the task. So your own answer about understanding whatever you can from a single image, it is completely bereft of any purpose.
Oh, I mean, for me, for static image, there's only one task. The task is to get a 3D pass. It's essentially inverse computer graphics on a single image.
But that's impossible.
Not in 5 years. Well, no.
Technical sense of having only one image.
No, I think a human can do it. I shut my eye. I can get some. I mean, there is certain uncertainty in it, but I can get a lot of that out, I would say. I mean, what?
Like if we close one eye, can we find our fingers?
Well, certainly, and it's harder to play cricket with one eye than with two eyes. But I think so I should quantify it a bit by saying I think you can. It should be what you aim at doing, and maybe it's not practical, and maybe it's not practical for humans. Because what it's doing is you need the information for the image, you need a world model, and you need some prior knowledge about the world, and you need an inference algorithm that can do it. And maybe humans can't do it because maybe it's, I mean, it may be impossible in the sense there's enough information. That would be a limit, but we don't know that. For humans not doing it, we don't know. That may be, that's just that they don't need to do it. Why would you need to do it if you're human?
Humans would always keep on moving. So anyways, you know the scale of things. And
right. And you can do it from two views. But that was my answer to Regina. I would like to sort of get it from one image, and then I'd treat the second image as a way of improving over what I get from one. So if I do it from one, I get it with certain noise, error bars, etc. And my second image will just give you a bit more information that could help me do it. So that's sort of a belief of one image only.
You do with two images because then you just need correspondence.
Oh yeah, no, it makes it easy. So it makes it too easy. So it means that, I mean, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it that way, but it means that you are maybe missing, you're getting into a formulation of the problem to make it easy for you. So a lot of work on motion used to be that you take images and then you find interest points and you track them, and you do a lot of things just because to get it to work, you need to do something like that. But I'm not sure that, I was not sure that you need to do it that way. And this is the fundamental physicist in me thinking, yeah, that's a practical sense and that would make sense. And if I had to build a working system now or next 10 years, I would do that. Or if I was driven by getting robotics to do things now, I would do that. But I'm saying more fundamentally, maybe that's not the best way to do it. And let's stick on the images, and then let's say the extra images, they give you a bit more, but you don't need, you shouldn't just rely on it. A one-eyed human could learn a model about the world, and people do, sportsmen. I guess you may not, Nawab Pataudi, he was an Indian cricket player. Yeah, so he lost an eye in an accident. He was never the player he was after that. But I mean, he could still play. He could still play in test cricket with one eye and a bit or something like that. So it's possible. I mean, I say, yeah, the next image just makes it easier, reduces the noise. But this is a more philosophical approach to it.
Yes, I hadn't heard this perspective before. I think it makes sense because a little bit for an engineer, why would you?
Well, I used to argue this a bit with Stefano, but Stefano did not like this idea very much. Stefano is very much in the belief in imaging. Yeah, you're contaminated by Stefanoism.
I do not disagree. There is some contamination.
Yeah. But yeah. No, I mean, it's certainly, and even getting back to humans, there's evidence that, right, what the visual abilities humans learn are ones related to motion and not just to static images. You know, so we do that to exploit it, but that's during our development stage. And if we're mimicking how AI was mimicking exactly how humans would develop it, we'd do that too. But do we need to? Anyway, yeah, we can argue other way. I just say, perhaps because it's not a usual view, I like having it.